Hello and welcome to Big Picture Walks. So we're going to talk today about the history of the human civilization. And to talk about that, let me start with a big zoom in. Okay, let me start with the history of the universe. So the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago. With a bang, began with a big bang, and then 4.6 billion years ago, there was the beginning of Earth. Soon thereafter, soon at these long time scales, about 4 billion years ago, there was the beginning of life on Earth. But this was mostly unicellular, so very simple life. For most of the time. There was a big event, though, in the history of the Earth, namely the Cambrian explosion about 540 million years ago. And that marked the beginning of diversification, of development of various species, and ultimately life as we know it today came to existence, so there are plants, there are animals, and so on. So if you go back at this time scale, the existence of our civilization, the existence of our species on Earth is a really, really short period of time. It's really very tiny. In fact, our direct predecessors, other hominin species, arrived on the face of Earth about 2,400,000 years ago. The Homo sapiens arrived on the face of Earth about 200,000 years ago. And for 65% of this time, we are just one of many species in this never-ending struggle for survival, trying to survive and multiply and pass the genes to the next generation. About 70,000 years ago, there was this cognitive revolution. And the cognitive revolution was a real game changer. It was a first stepping stone towards the construction of the current human civilization. So what happened 70,000 years ago? We have gradually passed through the threshold of cumulative knowledge accumulation at the level of our species. And before that, to achieve lasting progress, we must have stored information, the useful adaptations in our genome. And that was an extremely slow process. And we were bound to species evolution to achieve progress. But things changed with the cognitive revolution. We could learn, and not just learn new tricks as animals can do. Okay, it's not just like a dog or a seal that can learn some tricks. But we actually achieved lasting progress because we could pass the new knowledge to next generations. Okay, and how did it happen? It happened because of the development of the frontal cortex of our brains. It was not really about the development of our cognitive skills that could enable us to think faster or deeper and so on. Really, it was mostly about communication. So it was about the rate at which we forget the information, about we lose information. And this rate went down thanks to the ability to communicate, to coordinate in bigger groups, thanks to the ability to work together. After all, we are a social species, aren't we? Okay, the cognitive revolution really was a big game changer. It enabled our species to spread across the whole world, and eventually, about 11,000 years ago, the colonization was complete and people could be found on every continent on Earth, apart from, of course, Antarctica. We've conquered basically all types of ecosystems, and we've came from the middle of the food chain to the position of the apex predator in virtually every ecosystem. And that was a huge leap. Yet, about 10,000 years ago, there were only 5 million people on Earth. For today's standards, we're really a tiny number. So what happened next? Okay, the next big change was the agricultural revolution. And one cannot say there was just one agricultural revolution. In fact, there are many. But the key thing about the first agricultural revolution in the Fertile Crescent about 10,000 years ago, the Fertile Crescent is in modern day in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And we actually learned to change the ecosystem. Before the agricultural revolution, we just dominated every ecosystem. But that was not enough, actually, right? We wanted to change the ecosystem so that it better serves our needs. People learned to domesticate first food crops, such as wheat, barley, pea. Okay, so there are these founder crops that enabled first farming, first agriculture. Next, our ability to change the ecosystem into farmland and gain many more calories out of a unit of area enabled us to increase human population on Earth multiple times. There was a huge increase in the pace of population growth after the adoption of sedentary agriculture. What was happening in the background throughout the agricultural era was gradual accumulation of knowledge, gradual accumulation of information about the world, about the properties of plants, about the properties of animals, about geography, biology, physics, and so on. And there were a few leaps in this regard. So, for example, 3400 BC, there was the first emergence of writing alphabets in ancient Sumer. There was antiquity in Greece and in Rome, which was a period where there were many big achievements in terms of science, philosophy, and so on. But that actually didn't really make to the point of a full-blown technological revolution. We had to wait for that until the 15th, 16th century and the Common Era in Europe. That was a scientific revolution, and that was a major leap in terms of our ability to gather information, process, and pass information. It was not really about writing, because that was known for centuries. It was really, first of all, about the printing press, which enabled a massive reduction of costs of information transmission. Many more people could access information now thanks to the printing press. Many people could also engage. Many more people could engage in an inquiry, and that was a period where we've witnessed. Europe has witnessed series of scientific breakthroughs. That was also a period which saw the emergence of universities. So the emergence of the scientific method, hypothesis testing, empiricism, mathematization, all these building blocks of what we these days know as science. And that was also accompanied by what we call, with an imperial flavor, what we call geographical discoveries. Discoveries for Europe, not for the world. Anyway, so there was also a period of colonial conquests of European empires, and a big increase in the scale of the economy. So we are actually approaching yet another key breakthrough in the history of the human civilization, and that is the Industrial Revolution. Okay, the Industrial Revolution began first in England and then spread to other parts of Europe and so-called European offshoots like the US. Okay, and so that happened around 1800. And the key developments of the Industrial Revolution were new ways of obtaining energy, and the new source of energy now was fossil fuels. Okay, so basically the essence of the Industrial Revolution was about the steam engine, about the internal combustion engine, about electricity, but these were all means of attaining energy from, well, at that time, fossil fuels. The Industrial Revolution was the dawn of modern growth. The Industrial Revolution initiated a period in history where global output however you measure it. It can be, for example, global GDP, gross domestic product. GDP began to double every 20-30 years. In modern standards, that seems like normal, but it has never been normal, and it's a huge acceleration of growth. How was this achieved? Energy was the first building block, but then, of course, you also had progress in knowledge accumulation. You had improved diffusion of skills, technology across the world. So before the Industrial Revolution, there was a Malthusian mechanism going on, which essentially meant that all progress in output or progress in technology sooner or later translated into more people, more affluence, enabled to feed more people, and there was no counteracting force, and basically the number of people increased, the level of affluence went down again to subsistence level. Wealth was not widely shared. Wealth was really very strongly concentrated, and that changed to shift because the industrial era began to demand human skills, began to demand human capital, and began to pay more and more. Economists tend to think that the industrial era will last forever. However, we've already seen yet another shift, yet another technological revolution. Around 1980, the dating is never clear, but let me tentatively say around 1980, we've witnessed the emergence of the digital era. And of course, I mean computers, I mean smartphones, I mean the internet, I mean all the digital stuff that you know very well in your everyday life. What is the change here? Well, again, it's an acceleration in growth. So if you recall that, for all the millennia of the hunter-gatherer era, we could only build our population number to about 5 million people. And then this number multiplied during the agricultural era. Then GDP began to grow, not just in the aggregate sense, but also per capita. Productivity per worker began to grow. And basically these numbers doubled at the global scale every 20-30 years in the industrial era. Now, what happens in the digital era is that information transmission, information processing, data storage, all these things tend to double every 2 to 3 years. Okay, maybe you're aware of Moore's law. People could say that the Moore's law is an industrial standard and it's a goal in itself and so on, and that's all true. But it's also a sign of the times. Okay, it's also a defining characteristic of the digital era, where progress is really, really fast. Now, this progress is not translating into progress in living standards or GDP thus far, but who knows what will happen in the future. Before I wrap up, a few caveats. The shift between technologies is never quick and never full, so you always have coexistence of technologies from various eras at the same time. You can have hunter-gatherers, probably even today, but certainly you had them for many millennia after the emergence of farming in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago. But then, for example, if you think about the Industrial Revolution, again, the farming is still, subsistence farming is still present in today's world. And the same goes for digital technologies. Digital technologies had a strong feedback effect on industrial technologies, because better information transmission and communication helped lower costs of trade, of international cooperation, and it enabled fragmentation of production, emergence of global value chains, global linkages between firms, and interconnectedness between countries. throughout this talk, I'm going to concentrate on the level of development at the global scale. So I'm not going to talk about the wealth of nations. I'm not going to talk about who's rich, who's poor. By the way, that's to a large extent determined by the timing of takeoff into another era. Like who took off first into the industrial era really matters a lot, even today, for who's rich, who's poor. But that's really beside the point I'm going to make here, which is about the mechanisms and about the timeline of progress of the human civilization. So this is the big picture I'm going to address. You see, we are approaching this nice shelter, so it's time for the wrap-up. You may have noticed I've mentioned 5 technological revolutions: the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, and the digital revolution. And it's important to observe that there is a clear pattern between those revolutions. They affect our world in 2 ways. Either they affect the way in which we achieve our energy, or they affect the way in which we process information. My way of putting this is that there are revolutions in hardware. These are the energy revolutions, and revolutions in software, information processing revolutions. There is this pendulum that swings back and forth between hardware and software, and you have the cognitive revolution that affected software, the agricultural revolution affected hardware, the scientific revolution affected software, the industrial revolution affected hardware, and the digital revolution affected software. So it's a very nice pattern, and we're going to talk about that much more in next episodes of this series. Each new era puts growth in another gear, accelerates growth a lot. And it's not a surprise, and it's not a coincidence that these revolutions affected hardware and software in this interchangeable way. Both hardware and software are essential for the functioning of our civilization. We need to have energy to do things, and we need to have the information to know what to do. So this is basically the key observation here. We need the energy, we need the information, and there is a relative scarcity that evolves over time, and our incentives are to reduce the scarcity. After the first breakthrough, the cognitive revolution, we achieved this big progress in our way of processing information, and that was actually enough to start the whole civilization. But later on, as we knew more and more about the ecosystems, about the properties of the world around us, we needed progress in the ways of achieving energy to accelerate our development. We managed that by inventing agriculture, by changing the ecosystems so that they will serve us better in achieving energy, in feeding more people. Right? And then again, as the agriculture evolved and improved, there are more and more people in the world, and what began to be scarce was this information. We wanted to reach beyond this kind of Middle Ages situation where just everything repeats itself without end, and there's really very slow progress. And this could be achieved during the scientific revolution. And then again, we learned much more about the world, and we realized that we can access better sources of energy. Fun facts. I said that the human civilization began about 70,000 years ago, and people dispersed across the whole world in the coming millennia, and about 11,000 years ago it was more or less complete. However, not fully complete, and there was one place in the world which only was colonized by people around 1300 of the current era, and that's New Zealand. Okay, another fact we are responsible for many extinctions. Mammoth, diprotodons in Australia, saber-toothed cats in Americas, and so on. So blame us. Okay, another fun fact. Australia was populated by the Homo sapiens already about 65,000 years ago, which was much earlier than Europe, which was only populated 20 to 25 millennia later, mostly because of the Neanderthals. Because Europe at that time was populated by other hominin species, and it took 20 to 25 millennia for the Homo sapiens to get sufficient advantage to actually colonize Europe as well. You may say that the difference in cognitive capacities between the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals was tiny. That's all now. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Cheers.